Okay, so let's say we met for the first time right now, and I told you I lived in America practically all my life. I told you that I was born in America and raised in America, and I only moved here to Korea about a few years ago. So, am I American or am I Korean? If I were in the States right now, the majority of people would probably say I'm Korean, and they would probably say that because at first glance, if you were to look at me, it's easy to see and deduce that I'm Asian based on my skin color and how I look. But on the other hand, if I were in Korea, people would see me as a Korean because I am, but would consider me as an American based on the way I dress or how I do my makeup differently, and mostly the way that I speak. So my question is, how do we create a society where your background doesn't determine biased preconceptions? Hi, my name is Esther Rowe, and I want to tell you guys about my experiences as being a dual citizen and how it leads to racial inequality, discrimination, and how being culturally different in another country affects today's society in global citizenship. But what is global citizenship? Global citizenship is the responsibility to take an active role in your community and work with other people to make the planet, our Earth, a more peaceful, fair, and sustainable place. A step that our school, or Valor Nation, is taking is we're providing one-to-one programs with kids in Haiti, India, Kenya, and the Philippines, and it allows them to receive an education. An important aspect in education is objectivity and being knowledgeable in all aspects of our society. Because most of my life was spent in America, I grew up adapting more to the American culture rather than the Korean culture. And I still grew up knowing and practicing the Korean culture because I was raised by full Korean parents, which means I'm full Korean by blood. And they were both accustomed to the Korean culture, but I was more adapted to the American ways. And as I kept moving to places, I realized that standards and expectations are tremendously high, and people expect you to be adapted to those standards and expectations that are well known. But it also affected the way that I was treated in both countries. So in America, the expectations, I guess, are high for Asian stereotypes. For example, Asians have a reputation for being advanced in academics, like being good at math. And people expect me to live up to those standards or stereotypes. But let me tell you something, I don't meet those standards or expectations academically, especially with math. I'm extremely hopeless when it comes to math. So you can see that I don't meet up to one of those expectations. Another personal experience related to racism is that when I was in elementary school, which is honestly like 3 years ago, ESL, or English Second Language, was a program, and it was provided to foreign students who struggled with English. And like I said before, I was born and raised in America and completely fluent in English, but the ESL program teachers, they took me to check my English because they assumed that I had a lower English proficiency based on the fact that I didn't look Caucasian. Also, my siblings and I always spoke English with each other, and we rarely spoke to each other in Korean, and we still rarely speak to each other in Korean. We mostly communicate in English. So when I first came to Korea and I was talking to them out in public, people would hear us double take, and we would mostly get like shocked or startled looks. The most common phrase would always be Americans, or 외국인, or wow, they're so good at English. 영어 진짜 잘한다. And I was surprised because I didn't think being fluent in English was uncommon. Even when I transitioned to an international school, I feel like being a fluent English-speaking student is still trying to live up to stereotypical expectations I mentioned before, but in Korea, they're kind of swapped. So in America, the expectation was being advanced academically, but in Korea, because I'm fluent in English, it's excelling in English. So students would assume that because I'm fluent in English, I should have knowledge of everything English related. So writing, vocabulary, writing comprehension, reading comprehension, or basically any kind of work that uses English, which in international schools, it's all subjects. And I still lack in my studies, even if they're held in the language that I understand and feel most comfortable with. But most people don't understand that. Therefore, they would come to me and ask for my assistance with work that they had. But when I didn't know the answers to the questions that they asked, I could feel them in shock and disappointment because they relied on my English speaking skills because I was fluent in English. My overall point is that being culturally different in two different countries causes assumptions about what we know, and it holds us unfair to standards. Another issue I dealt with was discrimination against my skin color. So in America, I dealt with a little bit of discrimination in elementary school. So around 5th grade of elementary school, I started to notice that foreign students were treated differently. And this didn't apply to every single teacher or every single student, but in my experience, there were one of the teachers that I had that favored the white kids more than the Asian kids. And there were often times where favoritism was happening between the Korean kids in my class and then the Caucasian kids in my class. If we asked questions, our questions wouldn't be answered properly, and the teacher would give less information or effort in answering the questions that we had, and it would be brief and very vague compared to the answers given to my Caucasian classmates if they were to ask questions. On top of that, my relationship with that teacher was not good because I disliked that teacher for treating us differently, and it was clear that the teacher didn't like me either. But as a young 10-year-old, I felt discriminated against because of my race. And because it affected me at such a young age, I grew up unwantingly aware of the discrimination around me, which had me scarred as I grew up. That leads to how being a different ethnicity or race affects how people are treated around the world as well. It's especially with what is going on in the United States right now. Racism is a very big thing, and it's something that has been going on for the longest time. Racial discrimination and segregation, like segregation between black people and white people, it's written in history books, textbooks, like Rosa Parks, for example, or Martin Luther King Jr., and their experience dealing with discrimination. Innocent lives were taken by white police, and African Americans were treated unjustly, if I were to put it mildly. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and many other African Americans were killed by cops. There are many other African Americans who were killed, and they still haven't been served justice because their deaths went by unnoticed. And it's not only African American lives being taken, but as it's all over social media, Asian hate crimes are going on, and Asian lives are being taken. There was this video that I saw, and it went viral on social media. It was about a 65-year-old Filipino immigrant woman, so an elderly, who was attacked by a man in broad daylight. And this happened in New York City. The man told the woman that she didn't belong here, and he kicked her once in the head. Then that one time became many times, and he repeatedly kicked her in the head. And nearby, there was a security guard who was aware of what was happening, but he closed the door to the front of the building as the woman was struggling to get up. And there are more cases like this happening towards Asian immigrants as well. And the suspects mostly target elderly Asian immigrants because they tend to be weaker than teenagers or adults, I guess. So how is this all related to global citizenship? Let's first talk about what being a global citizen means. Being a global citizen means a lot of things. It means someone who is aware of events that are happening in the world and their part in it, someone who gets involved in their communities, someone who voices their opinions on an event that's happening, and more. So now that we, citizens of the world, are aware of the racial discrimination in the world, how can we be a global citizen in this topic? How can we better the world and make an impact? You can't just make a huge change in just one try, because change is something that takes a lot of time with many efforts. So what's something that we can do? Let's start off with something small. You can try building awareness by posting on your social media of issues that are happening today and that everyone should know about. Or you can even support small businesses owned by different races. But by the time people have reached adulthood, it's too late, and people already have mindsets that are set in concrete. So the solution is to target students at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Earlier, I talked about how I'm a part of a one-to-one program that allows children in developing countries to have an education. But what we also need to focus on is providing education that allows the next generation to be mindful and aware of the world around them. Not only in developing countries, but in all countries. This is what